Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take your sources and get you informed fast. Today, we're diving into something really practical. It's about navigating the nuts and bolts of English usage, and we're drawing specifically from excerpts from a very widely respected guide, Practical English Usage. Our mission here, really, is for you. We want to cut through some of the complexity. We'll explore some key points on grammar, usage, maybe some vocabulary, pull out the useful bits, and try to clarify those common places where English can, trip people up a bit. The goal is really to help you get a solid handle on these specific points. Quickly, thoroughly, straight from a top resource.
That sounds like a great goal. And, detailed guides like this one offer such valuable clarity, especially on those parts of English that can sometimes feel a little, counterintuitive. English grammar is vast, no doubt about it. But focusing on these fundamentals, these common tricky spots like our source does, that really helps build accuracy and confidence, too.
Okay, then. Let's unpack this. So, first up, how we talk about time, tenses. Getting the timing right in English sentences, it can feel a bit like solving a puzzle sometimes, can't it?
It really can.
And our source material, it lays out several core tenses, showing their forms and uses pretty clearly.
Yeah, and one of the first things it does, which is, I think, super helpful, is distinguish between simple and progressive forms. You can think of simple forms as often describing things that are like complete facts or habits. Progressive forms, though, they usually put the focus on an action that's kind of in the middle of happening, or maybe it's temporary.
Exactly. Like, take the simple present. The source shows the forms we all know. I work, he works, do you work? He doesn't work. But the key thing is its basic use. It's not just for now in the immediate sense, but for, repeated actions, routines.
Right. Or general facts. Things that are always true, like the sun rises in the east, or I walk to work every day, that kind of thing.
Right. And then contrasting that, you've got the present progressive. The source really highlights its main use for situations happening around now, things that are temporary or in progress at this moment.
Yeah, the examples are good here.
Like, hurry up, we're all waiting for you, it's happening right now. Or, I'm writing emails, he's working in Saudi Arabia at the moment. Temporary situation.
And the source explicitly points out you wouldn't usually say, we all wait, in that first example.
No, it really captures that feeling of something actively unfolding right now.
Definitely.
Okay, so, simple present, facts, habits, present progressive, temporary actions, things in progress now. What about looking back? The past.
Well, for the past, the simple past is sort of your default, your go-to for completed actions at a finished time. The source gives those straightforward examples. I saw Jack yesterday. Yesterday is finished. The seeing is finished.
Okay.
Or one day the princess decided. The decision happened. It's done. Complete.
And then there's the past progressive.
Right. The source explains the form, was, were, plus the ing verb, and its use. It's typically for a longer action that was happening in the background.
Right, when something shorter interrupts it.
Exactly. When a shorter, simple past action interrupts, the classic examples the source uses illustrate this perfectly. As I was walking down the road, that's the long background action. I saw James, that's the short interruption.
Oh, okay, I see.
Or the phone rang while I was having dinner. Dinner's the background. The phone ringing cuts in.
Yeah, and the source even has those diagrams, doesn't it? Showing the long line for the progressive action and a dot or short line cutting across for the simple past.
It does. And that visual really makes it click, I think. Seeing the longer action versus the shorter event.
That visual is key, yeah. Okay, one more tense for now. The present perfect.
Ah, yes. The source gives the basic form, have or has, plus the past participle. But the really crucial insight here is its connection to now. Well, it's used for actions that happened in the past, but have some kind of result or relevance in the present, what the source calls time up to now. And it's absolutely essential for talking about duration, things that started in the past and continue up to the present, especially with for and since.
Gotcha.
The source examples are clear. I've known her for a long time. So the knowing started in the past, and it's still true now.
Okay.
Or we've lived here for 20 years. Started 20 years ago, still living here now.
Right. And the source warns against just using the simple present for that, doesn't it?
It does. It specifically says, not I know her for a long time. That distinction, present, perfect for duration up to now, is really vital.
All right. That gives us a good handle on some core tenses. Let's shift focus a bit. Let's look at the passive voice. This is all about changing the emphasis in a sentence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Focusing on what was done or who received the action rather than, who did it. The agent, as they call it.
And the form is usually some form of the verb be plus the past participle.
The source gives a simple example. This picture was probably painted by a child. The picture's the focus, not the child.
Right. And the source is really good at highlighting specific points within the passive voice that can cause, confusion. One area is passive structures that involve prepositions.
Ah, okay. Like?
Well, the key thing here is that often the preposition that's linked to the verb in the active voice, it's absolutely necessary. You can't just drop it in the passive. The source shows examples like, the plan has been looked at carefully. You need the at.
Okay.
She's never listened to. You need the to. Your meal has been paid for.
Oh.
You need the for.
Right. And the warning it gives.
It says, I don't like to be shouted at. And then in brackets, not, I don't like to be shouted, because the verb phrase is shout at someone. That at has to stay.
That point about the preposition is so important. And okay, here's one I know people find tricky. The source talks about verbs that can take two objects.
Yes, that's a classic tricky spot.
The guide explains that normally only the first object in the active sentence can become the subject in the passive sentence. This is where learners often, stumble.
Definitely.
The source shows the correct passive from an active sentence like, they suggested a meeting place to us. The passive is, a meeting place was suggested to us.
Right. The meeting place becomes the subject.
But then it shows the common incorrect form. We were suggested a meeting place. You just can't usually do that with a verb like suggest.
Oh, it sounds quite unnatural.
Similarly, from somebody threw stones at him, the correct passive is stones were thrown at him. Not he was thrown stones at. The source also clearly flags she was broken her mirror as wrong. You can't make the person the subject like that if the thing is also right there as a direct object.
Yeah. Those examples of what not to do are really helpful sometimes. The source also briefly touches on passive infinitives. That's the to be plus past participle form. Like in the example, the hostages are expected to be released today. And it also lists, it is expected to make a profit this year as something to be careful with, pointing to another section about sort of problematic it structures with passive verbs.
So the insight is?
Well, I think the insight is that some structures that seem logical in the active voice just don't translate directly or correctly into the passive, especially with these two object verbs or these impersonal its constructions.
Yeah.
You have to know the specific patterns.
Thinking about these examples, the correct ones and the incorrect ones from the source, you've probably heard some of these, maybe even use them. Does seeing the incorrect version right next to the correct one and understanding why it's wrong help you clarify things? For me, it definitely helps spot that sort of off feeling sometimes.
Absolutely. Seeing the contrast is often key.
Okay, let's move on. Modals. Those verbs like can, could, may, might, must, should.
Little powerhouses.
Yeah. They don't just describe an action, they add all these layers of meaning. Possibility, necessity, suggestion, advice. And they often follow special rules. Our source material details these really effectively.
Modals really let us express nuance, don't they? Yeah. Let's start with obligation. The source talks about must versus have to. Now, the insight here is that while they both express obligation, how we use them differs, especially thinking about future time or existing arrangements.
How so?
Well, for future obligation, you have to use will have to. The source points out you just cannot say will must. It doesn't exist.
Right.
And for obligations that are already arranged or planned, that to is often preferred.
Okay. Examples?
Source gives, when you leave school, you'll have to find a job. That's future obligation. And I've got to go for a job interview tomorrow. That sounds like an existing arrangement.
Makes sense.
You can also use gonna have to, like we're gonna have to repair that window. And while have to is super common for general obligation, must often feels a bit stronger, maybe more internal, or a firm necessity. Like, I really have to stop smoking, or I really must stop smoking.
Got it. Okay, what about possibility? Using can, could, may, might. This is another area where people get confused.
It really is. The source clarifies that can is mainly for ability. Like, she can speak 6 languages.
Or potential based on current circumstance.
Exactly. Like, I can see you tomorrow, meaning my schedule allows it. The possibility exists because of current facts. But the key insight is that for general possibility where there's less certainty, may and might are the typical choices.
And the source gives a correction here.
It does. We may go camping this summer, and explicitly notes not we can go.
Interesting. What about could?
Well, could is also used for possibility, often suggesting maybe a smaller chance, like it could rain later this evening, perhaps. But But the source specifically lists it can rain this afternoon as incorrect if you just mean general possibility. You'd usually need may or could there.
Okay, that's a subtle but important distinction. Now, what about advice or weaker obligation? Should and ought to.
Right. The source covers should and ought to. The main insight is that they have very similar meanings, suggesting what's advisable.
But then there's had better.
Ah, yes. The source points out had better is stronger. It's stronger advice, often about something immediate, maybe with a hint of a warning if the advice isn't taken. It feels more urgent than just should or ought to.
Can you give the examples?
Sure. You ought to see a dentist. That's general good advice. You care of that too. You better turn that music down before your dad gets angry.
Yeah. Much more urgent. You can feel the potential consequence there.
Exactly.
And there's that structure the source shows, using a modal verb plus a perfect infinitive.
Yes, that's the modal, then have, then the past participle, like have told, have gone.
And we use that for?
Talking about the past. Often something that didn't happen but maybe should have, or perhaps guessing about something in the past. The source's example is perfect. You should have told me you were coming. It expresses that past expectation or obligation that wasn't met.
Very useful structure.
And finally, the source lists some common errors that just help reinforce the basic rules. Like seeing I must to water the plants, marked as wrong. It's that simple reminder. Modals are followed by the base form of the verb, no to.
Right. They're special helper verbs. They don't behave like regular verbs needing to before the next verb.
Precisely.
Okay, wow. We've covered some key structures and meanings. Let's zoom in now on some smaller but absolutely crucial elements, the details that really polish your English.
Yeah, the little things that make a big difference.
Thinking about articles, pronouns, and where adjectives go, adjective position.
These smaller words and how we arrange them, they matter hugely. Let's take articles, the a, an, for specific things, a or an for general or first mention, basic stuff, but the source highlights specific patterns, and importantly, when not to use an article.
Right, like when talking about things in general.
Exactly, that's a core insight. The source shows we typically use no article for general concepts. The example, books are expensive. And it explicitly says not the books are expensive if you just mean books in general.
Not a specific pile of books.
Right. And the source even includes practical stuff, like the pronunciation difference for the, saying EG before a vowel sound, like the apple.
And agree before a consonant sound, like the book. Little details, but they help with fluency.
They do. Moving to pronouns. The source hits some common spots where people get stuck. One key point. Personal pronouns often can't just be left out, even if the meaning seems clear.
What's the example?
They arrested Alex and put him in prison. Not just and put in prison. You need the him. It sounds incomplete otherwise in English.
Okay. And what about agreement, like with somebody or anyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pronoun agreement with indefinite pronouns like somebody, anyone, nobody. The insight here, and the source reflects modern usage, is that it's very common and accepted now to use they, them, or their to refer back to these words, especially when you don't know the gender or want to be inclusive.
So the source actually supports using they.
It does. It quotes the rule. If anybody wants a ticket, they can get it from my office. Or using them for somebody at the door, tell them I'm busy. This reflects how the language is actually used now.
That's really useful to know. Okay, adjective position. Another area with rules and exceptions.
Right. Detailed in the source. The usual spot is right before the noun, yeah. A sleeping baby. Simple.
But
Here's where it gets interesting. Some adjectives are used only after linking verbs. Verbs like be, seem, feel, become.
Can you contrast that?
Sure. The source contrasts, he seems intelligent. Intelligent describes he after the linking verb seems with he spoke intelligently. There, intelligently is an adverb describing how he spoke. Different structure, different meaning.
Gotcha. Adjective after linking verb, adverb after action verb.
Generally, yes. And another important point. When an adjective has its own complement, that extra bit needed to complete its meaning.
Like in design and skilled in design.
Exactly. That whole adjective phrase usually comes after the noun. The source gives people skilled in design, not skilled in design people. That sounds very odd.
Okay.
And one last quick point, the source notes.
Yeah.
Adjectives usually come afterwards, like something, anything, everywhere.
Right. Like, have you read anything interesting lately? The interesting follows anything.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay. We really have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Sure.
We started with getting the timing right with tenses, looked at how the passive voice changes the sentence's focus, explored how modal verbs add those layers of, possibility, obligation, advice,
Right.
and then we zoomed in on those crucial details. Articles, pronouns, adjective position.
And remember, those are just some highlights, pulled directly from the source material. The goal wasn't, to cover every single grammar rule in existence.
No, definitely not.
But hopefully to show how looking closely at specific usage points, with clear examples from a resource like this, can provide really concrete insights.
Yeah.
It can demystify things that might otherwise seem, just random or confusing about English.
So what does this all mean for you listening?
I think the core insight is that paying attention to these kinds of details, understanding why a certain structure is used or why another one is incorrect, not just that it is, that can really improve the clarity and the accuracy of your English.
Absolutely.
Whether you're speaking or writing. Knowing the underlying principle just helps you use the language more confidently, more effectively.
And, the source makes a really interesting point near the end. It mentions how sometimes overly complicated structures, or even leaving out words ellipsis, it's called, can actually cause problems for the listener or reader trying to understand you.
That's a good point.
So thinking about that, mastering these grammatical structures, it isn't just about following rules for the sake of rules.
No. It's fundamentally about making sure your message gets across clearly, easily understood. So maybe something to think about is, how can focusing on understanding these practical points, like the ones we've talked about today, not only make you a better communicator,
but also maybe help you learn faster by training your ear and your eye to notice these exact structures when you hear and read English all around you?
Exactly. How can noticing them help you absorb them more effectively?
That's a great question to leave you with. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We really encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating world of English usage and to try putting some of these insights into practice.